And welcome back, this is Baller Scoopa with more bonus episodes of Let's Play Xenosaga Episode 3. Today we are going to be doing something a little different. I am not actually playing the game. I'm replaying showcase videos that I aired previously, and I am just going to sit and talk. And what I'm going to talk about is Xenosaga as a whole. I'm going to try to explain a few things that I feel kind of need to be explained because the game either didn't give any detail regarding it or not enough detail for my personal tastes. And if it wasn't enough for me, then chances are it probably wasn't enough for other people as well. So that's going to be the point of this video. Before we get started, I do want to point out a valuable resource. I'm going to link it in the description. I was linked to it by Trombone-san, David. It is a repackaging of a translation of a publication that was released in Japan only. I'm told that the publication translates to Xenosaga 3 Perfect Guide. It was translated by Jinx, and then Jinx had a few other people help out with the editing and reorganization and a couple of the diagrams in it. It is a valuable resource. I will say, though, that I would take what is said there with a grain of salt. Not necessarily because I think the translation is bad. I don't think the translation is bad. I honestly think that even though it was released officially by the company that made the game, I don't think that it was the person that actually wrote the story. Just reading through it, I got the impression that there were quite a few conjectures, a couple guesses, just a few things that didn't quite add up. So it didn't sound like an authoritative report of what happened in the story. So I wouldn't necessarily say everything in there is perfectly explained, but it is still a valuable resource. I will say that. But that's just my opinion on the work. But we're going to start with my opinions now. Some of my opinions are not necessarily consensus or mainstream. I'll try to point out when that happens, when I feel like I'm on the other side of the issue, and I'll try to explain why and why people feel the other way. So let's start with things that happened specifically in my Let's Play. There were two things that stand out in my mind now that I said specifically, do not Google that term, because if you Google that term, you will probably spoil the entire series for yourself. I said that twice, I believe. The first time it came up was when the term Gnosis came up, which was very early on. Now, Gnosis, of course, are one of the main enemies of the game. You fight a lot of Gnosis throughout the series, and you wouldn't necessarily think that Googling their name would spoil the whole thing for you, but I feel that it does. Not necessarily the word Gnosis itself, because the word Gnosis is just Greek for knowledge, but if you Google the term Gnosis, Gnosticism is almost bound to come up. Gnosticism starting GN, just like Gnosis. Gnosticism is a religious sect, I guess is probably the best way to put it. There's a lot of differing opinions on how to actually address Gnosticism. If you've ever heard of the Gospel of Judas, that was a Gnostic text. It is not exclusively Christian, but in at least America, when we think of Gnosticism, we think of Gnostic Christians. It's hard to kind of refer to Gnosticism as a whole, so I'm kind of trying to be careful with my words here. Gnosticism is one of the bases even, of Xenosaga as a whole. And a lot of what they talk about in Xenosaga is straight out of Gnosticism. If you look up Gnosticism now in Wikipedia, there was a bullet point when I checked earlier today, bullet point list, and almost every last one directly applied to Xenosaga. And I feel that a lot of Xenosaga is based in Gnosticism. Now, I should try to explain Gnosticism a bit. I will say it was deemed heretical by the rest of the church very early on. We are talking about roughly the time of Jesus when Gnosticism was around. A little bit after him, I think it was something like 50 to about 300 AD, somewhere around there. My numbers may be inaccurate, but that's the time frame that we are talking about. 50 to 300 AD CE, however you want to refer to it. So Gnosticism does have the belief, and this is, if you look at the guide that I sent you, there's a diagram that pretty much depicts the exact same thing. Gnosticism has the belief that there are essentially two levels of universes, is probably one way that I could put it. There is a lower domain and an upper domain. And we live in the lower domain. We live in the physical realm. In Xenosaga, they refer to this kind of as the realm of real numbers as opposed to the realm of imaginary numbers, which would be the upper domain. The upper domain is where Udu is from. Udu is probably best referred to as a god, not necessarily the creator god. They never refer to him as a creator in Xenosaga, but he definitely is a being whose power greatly exceeds normal humans by an infinite amount, it seems. So it's probably best to refer to him as a god. But I don't believe that in Xenosaga Udu is considered the only god. And the guide kind of says the same thing, which is there are probably multiple universes in, I guess we could say, a multiverse, where there are Udu-like beings in upper domain universes. And there are probably multiple lower domain universes as well. Now, that is the basic setup of Xenosaga's universe, or multiverse, however you want to phrase it, is that there are upper domains and lower domains, and we exist in one of the lower domains. Udu is from the upper domain, and due to something, he has the ability to observe into our domain. And he uses that to essentially warn people that the lower domain is going to dissipate, that the universe that we live in is going to catastrophically end. And that's why whenever somebody comes in contact with Udu, they go crazy. That's at least the explanation for why they go crazy, is that Udu goes, "Hey, your world's gonna end," and they freak out about it. That's that's really basic, but that's pretty much what they're trying to imply throughout the game and in the guide. They're trying to explain that Udu is trying to help us, but doesn't really necessarily know how. Now, there are several ways that Udu's domain and our domain are linked. Most obviously, Abel's arc is how he can send really himself into our domain, and then he kind of takes human form in Abel himself. And he is obsessed with trying to observe and trying to warn. Abel himself doesn't seem to warn, but Abel is very observant, and that's kind of what he's built around. So back to Gnosis. We've been on Udu for a bit here. Let's go back to Gnosis. So Gnosis are, I guess the best way to put it would be dead people. Sure, let's go with that. They are people that have died. And now we're going to start getting into Jungian psychology here. But Carl Jung, I believe it's Carl, Dr. Jung, believed that when you died, your consciousness went to a place called the collective unconscious. And that is where everybody's memories are stored. And if you got reincarnated, it would be your unconscious coming out of the collective unconscious and taking over somebody's body. That way you have some memories, but not a lot of memories. It's hazy or something. I'm not an expert on Jungian psychology by any means, but that is also what happens in Xenosaga. When a person dies, their consciousness goes to the collective unconscious. And some people are afraid of that, is one way to put it. And I think that's how they put it in the game too, that they're afraid of returning to the collective unconscious. Even though they have a desire to go there, most people just give in to their desire even though they're afraid, and they go back to the collective unconscious. But there's going to be a number of people that do not return to the collective unconscious, that their fear outweighs their desire to be with other people, so to speak, in the collective unconscious. Those are the ones that turn into Gnosis. And they will stay in the lower domain even though they do not have a physical form in the lower domain. They are part of the realm of imaginary numbers. The collective unconscious is also in the realm of imaginary numbers in Xenosaga. So they are really not bound by our physics, right? When you use imaginary numbers, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. There's no such thing as time. There's no such thing as distance. There's no such thing as really any laws of physics. You can just break them however the hell you want when you have imaginary numbers. So that's kind of the idea behind Xenosaga, is that the Gnosis break the laws of physics and they can do whatever they want. And they're trying to turn other people into Gnosis. The problem with that, not only on top of people dying, is that the more Gnosis that there are, the more that people are too afraid to return to the collective unconscious, the more that our lower domain universe is starting to tear apart at the seams, so to speak. So once we reach a critical point of Gnosis population, then our universe will explode, and therefore explode all the other universes as well. The upper domain, lower domain, if ours explode, they all go. That's the idea, from what I understand. So there has to be some sort of mechanism to prevent that from happening. And that turns out... Oh, before I move on from that, I should say the collective unconscious, that exists in the realm of imaginary numbers. That's actually the UMN. The UMN is the collective unconscious, and they can tap into that using machines, and they can transfer things through the UMN, through the collective unconscious, through the realm of imaginary numbers, right? They break the laws of physics because they start using imaginary numbers, and then they can just warp somewhere else. And it only appears in certain areas of space in our lower domain. And wherever there is UMN, there's a good chance there's going to be Gnosis, because they're also part of the imaginary number realm, even though they're in our realm. So the UMN and the Gnosis are linked because they're kind of tapping into the same energy, so to speak. So they're part of the same universe that happens to kind of intermingle with our universe. So that's what the UMN is. I felt like they never really explained that all the way through, but that's the idea there. So anyway, our universe is about to explode. There's too many Gnosis, right? So we need a failsafe to stop that. And the failsafe for that is Chaos, as it turns out. He has the power of anima. He is called Yeshua by Wilhelm, and we'll go into Wilhelm more later. Chaos is the embodiment of anima itself. He is Well, anima is kind of Jungian psychology too, and we're not going to go too much into it. Let's just say that he's only one half of the full power. You need the male and female in Jungian psychology to link up, and then you can do really cool stuff. And he's the male half of it, so anima. What Chaos's sole mission in life is, his only purpose since he was created, which who knows when that is. As far as I know, there's no official birth date for Chaos, but he was at least around at 30 AD. He was at least around then, but he's at least that old. His whole purpose in life is that if our universe is about to explode and destroy all the other universes as well, he is to destroy our universe, I guess in a safe way, so that it doesn't actually explode the other universes. That's his job, and he doesn't want to do it. He believes that we might be able to overcome it. Through the change in our wills, we can overcome this gnosis phenomenon. According to the guide, gnosis had existed since the beginning of time. Whenever they refer to things like fairies or genies or stuff like that, that was probably gnosis. But once we start getting huge population going by colonizing space and all that, that's when the gnosis problem becomes apparent. There's other stuff that comes with that, but that's the crux of Chaos's problem, is that we're starting to get to the point where the gnosis are overwhelming and taking over the universe, and it might explode, so he needs to stop that somehow. And his job is to destroy our universe in a way that does not destroy the other universes as well. But paired with that, his anima power is animus power, and that is held by Mary Magdalene.